So yes, my name is Jan, and I have a new way of introducing myself. So I'm trying it out on you today. I'm a woman who has survived active addiction, and I'm in recovery, which means that I have a life worth living beyond my wildest dreams that I want to keep. What do you think? It needs a little polishing still, and I have to still go pretty slow. But for me, it actually sounds better than what that means to me is I haven't used drugs since 1987. It's much more exciting to talk about the life that's worth living, because we also refer often to the fact that recovery means different things to different people. So if somebody wanted to know further about my life worth living and a life beyond my wildest dreams, you can ask me after the meeting, and I'll be glad to tell you. So we're going to talk about the fact that we are each other's keepers. We're also going to do some pairing up and talking with each other about our bias. And then somebodies will have the courage, shall we say, to share out loud, right? Because we keep saying, how many times have I come here and talked to y'all about recovery? Many times. So we must not be doing something that we're supposed to be doing. So I'm going to show a quick video. Some of you all have seen it before. I don't think we can see it enough. So just kind of feel your feelings, as we say. Feel your feelings as you're watching this. So what we're going to do today is have a new conversation, right? We more and more every day, I hear words like addict. I hear words still like junkie. I hear words like clean. I hear words, which is my least favorite, addict, a baby born addicted. And I don't just hear these things from people who are beyond the recovery community. I hear them from us. And one of the things that I know that we want desperately is for the stigma to stop. The stigma, the discrimination, the criminalization, all of those things that happen to us, we want them to stop. But until we change our language, why would anybody else change theirs, right? If that's what we're going to call ourselves, why would we expect someone else to call us something different? Does that make sense? So let's talk for a few minutes. The first set of words that you saw up there. Thoughts. Stigma. What else? Problem focused. What else? Suppression. What else? Discrimination. Hopelessness. How many people have heard those words within the past 24 hours? Most of us, right? I know I have. And so again, in order for us to break some of the discrimination, the hopelessness, we've got to start first. We don't get to ask somebody to do for us what we're not willing to do for ourselves. And it really means that that's what we think about us, and that's what we think about the people that we're providing services to. Because ultimately, that's what's within us, right? How many people know that addiction is a no-fault illness? Okay, a few of us. I think that's one of the places where we got to start. And so that's my talk for next year. Because I love talking about recovery, but until we understand that addiction is a disease and that we got it through no fault of our own, right? So how many of us, however long you've been in recovery, got up when you were a little kid and said, when I grow up, I want to be addicted to drugs? Anybody say that? Good. Right? So that means that you didn't choose to be an addict. If we talk about this thing as a brain disease and a brain disorder, and we do, then we have to live what we say, right? We have to do this thing called practice the principles of recovery. So what stood out to people when you looked at the second set of words? Hope, solution. Say again? Strength, acceptance, compassion, absolutely. Trust, understanding, validation. Aren't those all things we want? And so we too are striving for those things. So one of the things that we know, right, when we're talking about opioid use disorder, and we go all the way to the end, we're talking about severe opioid use disorder, also known as addiction. So when people say to me, this concept that drives me crazy, that babies are born addicted. Anybody ever say that? Be honest. Some of us, yeah, right? Because we didn't know any better. So one of the things that I heard from one of my heroes, Maya Angelou, says that when you know better, you do better. So I'm going to teach y'all this morning that it's impossible for a baby to be born addicted, okay? And the reason is, how many infants have you seen spend a lot of time obtaining opioids? How many have you seen repeatedly unable to carry out major obligations due to their use? Wanting to cut down or quit, but not being able to. It's not possible for a baby to be born addicted. Babies may be born exposed to substances, but it's impossible for a baby to be born addicted. Y'all got it? All right. I'm going to take a mental photo. Actually, this is going to be recorded, so I'm taking a mental photo of each of you, and if I hear you say it, you got some splaining to do. All right, go ahead. So the other piece, one of my favorite slides that we use in the Recovery Ally training, is that we know that based on problem resolution, that we get better, right? We get better. I was at a meeting many years ago, and I heard this man say his name, and then he said he was a sick and suffering addict, right? And he had been in this thing called recovery for 18 years. Who wants to be a sick and suffering addict after 18 years? Anybody? Where's the hope in that, right? And so again, the opportunity, and he believed that about himself, and he celebrated that about himself. We got a long way to go. So it's really cool, though. I love this slide. And one of the reasons I love it is because I've been doing this thing for 30-something years. And so what is it showing you? My life keeps getting better and better and better. And it will at least until I have 40 years, but hopefully by then they will have done some more research and it will scooch out a little bit further. That's my hope. The other piece, though, if you can't see these lines, Quality of life continues to get better. My happiness continues to get better. My recovery capital continues to get better. My self-esteem continues to get better. My psychological distress continues to go down, but not right away. And that's the hard part, right? So we've got this 6-month to 1-year period when stuff gets really hard, and frankly, life sucks, right? And that's when a lot of people return to use, because why continue to do this really hard thing of recovery if you aren't going to have those things, right? About that time, people's quality of life doesn't feel so good. Their happiness doesn't feel so good. And a lot of that's because we're cleaning up the wreckage of our past, right? We're waking up to the messes that we've made, and we're starting to address them. So for those of you who are working in this field of peer worker, call yourself whatever, recovery coach, da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da, that's when we really need to pay attention to our brothers and sisters in recovery, right? In early recovery. We don't need to shame them. The science says that they are going to get better. And for us, sometimes it says we are going to get better. It's going to get bad before it gets good. So one of the things that we also talk about, this is also one of the slides in our Recovery Ally training, not an advertisement or commercial for that, but if you happen upon it, it's a good thing. So we talk about this thing called chronic medical disorders and stigma. We got cancer, heart disease. These are diseases that we often compare addiction to, right? So if somebody has cancer, somebody bakes them, right? We we create this meal train thing, and we talk about it, and we do all those things. Somebody has heart disease, we take them flowers and write them nice cards. But if somebody has addiction, we don't talk about it. We might talk to each other who are in the know or in the community, but sometimes we don't even talk about them very well. What are some of the symptoms? Weight loss, pain, etc. Again, what are the symptoms? Chest pain, shortness of breath, etc. What are the symptoms of the illness that we have? Moody, irritable, irrational. We're withdrawn, we steal, we lie, we cheat. Fill in the blank for yourself, right? We don't like the symptoms of the illness we have. So separating the symptoms of the illness that we have from the person is really, really important. Because when we don't do that, we hear things like babies born addicted. We hear things like crack addict. So we're really just calling each other's names. We hear things like people say, pack your bags and get walking when somebody has a reoccurrence. We hear you didn't want it bad enough. We hear those people aren't allowed in these meetings. They're substituting one drug for another. They're not ready. I'm sure you all have heard some other ones. I hope we can get rid of those words and use the words that we saw in the second half of that. Right? So for us, they're behavioral symptoms, and they progress as our active addiction progresses. So what is recovery? Every year I come and I show you essentially these slides, that there are multiple definitions of recovery and that they differ in some regards, but they pay attention to changes that are well beyond abstinence and substance use. So if we stop there and all we're looking at is whether somebody is clean, if you took a shower this morning, you're clean, right? So we need to remember that. But in our default, and when we get emotionally dysregulated, there's my fancy word for today, we default to our own lived experience. And our lived experience is wonderful when it's used for good. It's our secret sauce, our superpower is our lived experience. Nobody can take it away from us. We worked really hard for it, most of us did. So SAMHSA, process of change through which individuals improve their health and wellness. The good news is that this working definition from SAMHSA, don't take its picture, because it's changing. It's not all the way out yet, but stay tuned, because a new definition is coming. And that new definition wasn't created in a vacuum by the wonderful people who treat this disease. It was created by people in recovery, supported by people who treat this disease. We're getting there. Another, Betty Ford, voluntary lifestyle, sobriety, personal health, and citizenship. CCAR, people are in recovery if you say you are. The pieces that sometimes those definitions don't get to is different cultures, right? We talk about this thing of cultural competency, and we talk about BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, people of color, and we talk about all of these other things. And so we need to know that one size doesn't fit all, right? So people in different cultures, ethnic backgrounds, understand this thing called recovery differently. And so I need to ask you, or you, or you, or you, what recovery means to you and what it is that you want. All right, here's where it's going to get hard. And I'm going to invite you into groups. So one of the ways to make sense of the different definitions of recovery is to describe individuals and their experience and to use values and principles that can be embraced by all organizations, activist movements, etc. So, scope of recovery is one of the things that we talk about when we talk about recovery principles. Are we looking only on it at addiction health, which is the primary? Are we looking at and considering primary and secondary, which talks about global health, right? In the beginning, I just wanted to not use and not die. I couldn't look at it. I didn't even know what global health was. I didn't want to die. And we all have our thing, right? So again, when you think about your own personal recovery or those that you serve or the people that you know, are you focusing on addiction health or are you focusing on both? And global health is things like, our emotional health, our behavioral health, right? It's our education. If we only focus on whether somebody is using or not using or has a pathological relationship or not, we're missing the quality of life pieces. It's no fun to just not use. It's no fun. Types of recovery. We've got abstinence-based recovery, which we really don't if there's coffee in the room and people are getting some, right? There's coffee over there. We drink energy drinks. I got my little Starbucks drink. So is abstinence-based recovery really abstinence? No. We have moderation-based recovery, which is about the deceleration of use to subclinical levels that would no longer meet diagnostic criteria. And I'm going to pause for a second because one of the other pieces that is tricky is this idea of no longer meeting diagnostic criteria. If you haven't had those symptoms that I put up there in a year, you no longer meet diagnostic criteria. And we'll talk more about that. Then we've got medication assisted or medication assisted. We got all kinds of fancy ways for saying that. When I was taking medication to support recovery from my addiction, I didn't know it was a thing. I didn't know it was a problem. I didn't know I was supposed to tell people. I just thought I was in recovery. And I was taking medication that allowed me to stay in recovery. And did it work? I didn't always know, but what I did know was that my life continued to get better and I didn't have a problem with using anymore. Why is that a bad thing? Why are we out here judging people if they take medicine to manage or support their recovery? That really troubles me because we do it. And I'm saying we because I'm part of this recovery movement. And so I can't separate myself and say, well, I don't do it. What I want to do is advocate so that we do that differently. Going back to some of those other chronic illnesses, do you think the people who have cancer say, well, her cancer really isn't, she's really not in remission or cancer recovery because she takes medicine, right? Somebody with heart disease, a lot of those folks take medicine for heart disease. Oh, she's just in medication-assisted recovery. Do you think they say that, or do you think they celebrate the fact that the people are alive and that they're moving in the direction of having a life beyond their wildest dreams, whatever that looks like for them? But that's not what we do. We say, you can't come to the meeting, or you can't talk in the meeting. I heard that just Tuesday, that in some meetings in far southwest Virginia, that you're not considered in recovery if you take medicine. So I had to pause. I was teaching a class, and I was like, we can't let that one hang. For those of us whose recovery is abstinence-based, and we use programs that are 12-step, what is the requirement for membership? Anybody? A desire to stop using. The entry fee is not, you have to be abstinent, or you cannot be on medication. That's not the entry fee. The entry fee is desire. So we got to get that stuff out of our heads because we're judging each other. And frankly, people are dying because of that judgment. So let's talk a little bit about these three. What do you think? Do you struggle with any of these? Do you struggle with people who you know? I mean, I hear stuff like, well, that person's just nodding out, right? When they take their medicine, they're just nodding, or they're abusing it. So what? They're not dead. Dead people don't recover, right? We need to support those folks. What was the conversation like? Yeah, Tom, go ahead.
So I hate all these terms, and for me, I think a lot of people would consider me as in kind of this category of abstinence-based recovery. But for me, like, my personal belief is that that's just inaccurate in terms of my experience. Like, my recovery is based in the things that I do to improve my health and wellness, and that allows me to be abstinent from drugs other than caffeine. And so you know, like, when I do ally training, I'm like, yes, medication-assisted recovery doesn't have stigma associated with it, but why wouldn't you just call it recovery? And I think moderation-based recovery is kind of equally, it creates levels, and it's not very helpful either.
Anybody else? Yes. See, you sit up front, but I do know how to walk back.
So I refuse to be categorized. My recovery is my own, and it is my self-directed, lived experience intertwined in there a little bit. And I just continue to work on myself and to better my life so that way that I have a fancy, fantastic, wonderful life just like you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Yes.
From a medical standpoint, medication is prescribed by a licensed physician. The people that are sitting in recovery meetings are lay people. They don't understand the brain chemistry and how that some people cannot not live with an opiate. And this is an alternative for them, for a person to get back on track with their life. And it's a judgment when we say that they're not allowed or that that's not true recovery, because there are people out there that have to live the rest of their lives. And we truly need to change the laws around the methadone clinics so that methadone can be administered by a general practitioner, just like Suboxone. So,
And those laws, thanks to COVID, are actually changing. And so far, those laws are going to remain in place, right? And one of the things that was really cool, that they were able to do some research during COVID on this notion that people who take methadone were going to abuse it. And the research didn't bear that out. We didn't do that. We took it as prescribed, and we did well, right? And this notion of abuse, right? How many of you, I never abused a drug. I loved them. Primary relationship, right? I thought about it all day and all night. I saved my money to be in that relationship. I might have misused some of the drugs that I took, but I didn't abuse them. Abuse also denotes crime. So why do we say in the criminal justice system? Because they say we're drug abusers, which means that we're criminals. Because if you abuse a child, you're a criminal. If you abuse an old person, you're a criminal. We are not drug abusers. We loved our drugs. Yes, Dr. Omar.
Thank you. I'm not in recovery. With all the compassion that I have, I still don't think I could come close to feeling of personal recovery. But I'm a doctor, I'm a surgeon, and we always advocate for addiction being in parity with other medical diseases, and you mentioned it, cancer. Here's how cancer is treated: surgery, chemotherapy, combination of chemotherapy, and they fit in these three categories. So it is really, they're all the evidence that, addiction is not any different than cancer or any other medical illnesses.
Right. And we say that, and we even have Dr. Omar here who can prove it, right? We might not be able to prove it, but he can. He has the research and all of the things that we need. So we got to get there, folks. We got to get there. People's lives depend on us getting there. Our lives depend on us getting there. Solo, this notion of natural recovery. Some of us have a really hard time with that. I know I did for a while. We use words like, they're just having a dry drunk, right? Or other names we call people. Solo, naturally. Treatment-assisted recovery, peer-assisted recovery. What do we think about that? Because sometimes when people are able to sustain abstinence and they're able to not use some of the pathways of treatment or peer-assisted or mutual support, we shame them and we tell them they're really not in recovery. Just because I might not have been able to do it, and some of us may not have been able to do it, doesn't mean that other people aren't able to do it, right? A lot of times that solo or natural recovery is based in really high recovery capital and really low problem severity. Does that make sense? Those folks can do it. I remember in my arrogance many years ago, anyway, that I was young. So I was able to initiate my recovery when I was 22, and I was working at this fancy treatment center for healthcare professionals who were treated like Dr. Omar talked about, right? So there are some populations that do get that kind of treatment. Thankfully, I was one of those people that got that kind of scientific treatment. So they were having us do this thing called mirror imaging, where we would go to the jail. And I met this guy, and I was like, why would you do this? You're old. Arrogant, right? And I said, and you're never even going to get out. Why would you do this really hard work of recovery? And then I met this older guy, and he was like 80-something. And back then, that was old to me. And I said, well, what difference does it make if you continue to drink or use drugs? You're old. And he said to me, both of them in their own words said, because I have grandchildren and they matter to me. I have people who are in jail with me and they matter to me. And I was like, okay. Experiences of natural recovery. They didn't look back. Once they made that decision, they didn't look back. It's a hard one, though. Frameworks of recovery, right? So we have some people. This would be where Celebrate Recovery lives, where Overcomers lives. There's lots of different religious-based recovery pathways and styles. Sometimes they can get a bit extreme, right? Where all you have to do is read a good book, and I'm a clergy person, so I'm not being disrespectful, right? You have to read a particular book, and you're going to be well. Didn't work for me. May have worked for some of you all. It can be okay that it didn't work for me, and it works for some of you all. My recovery is not diminished if somebody has a different pathway or does it different than me. Spiritual, right? This is often where we talk about the 12 steps and other aspects of recovery. That the only way, I have people that I am sharing partners with, and they'll say, well, she doesn't go to a meeting every day. And it's like, is that any of your business? Celebrate when she comes. Celebrate that she has a desire. But there's something about us that thinks that people have to do exactly what that we did, or they're not in recovery. And sadly, if your brain works at all like mine, which I know that some of yours do, when people tell you what to do, we don't do a good job of following those instructions, right? So when we're pushing recovery on someone else, it doesn't go well for them, and it doesn't go well for us because we are over-invested in their recovery or lack of. And it becomes about us. When I say I was just trying to help someone, that means I've stepped across a boundary because they probably didn't ask me to help them. I was just trying to help them. Some of us, religious and spiritual frameworks of recovery. Some of us, God or a higher power is irrelevant, right? It's irrelevant. Sometimes those are folks whose problem severity might not be as severe. Sometimes it is. And that's the other thing that's really hard about this thing called addiction and recovery, is that it's complicated. Wouldn't it be nice if it was just like, do this and everybody's going to get better? But it's not that way. Secular recovery are things like Life Ring, Women for Sobriety. As for other folks, we need to know. We know that sometimes people take chemo or take medication or have radiation, right? We know that about cancer treatment. We know that people who have diabetes, that some of them manage it with medicine, some of them take insulin. But we don't know how other people are getting into recovery because we don't know about these other things. We know about ours. So I encourage people to learn about some of these other pathways of recovery. And I know that my slides are going to get to be posted, so I've given you some of the resources. This is another very interesting recovery identity. And this is a part of where we get ourselves tripped up. So there are some people who have resolved their problem with alcohol or drugs and do not identify as alcoholics or addicts or people in recovery. They've just gone on with their lives. Not an issue anymore. Again, we often call those people names. There are also people that our status in recovery is an important part of our identity. I'm one of those people, right? My name is Jan, I'm in recovery. I come to recovery conferences. I run a recovery center. It matters. Later on, I'm going to be on a panel called Recover Out Loud. I think I might be recovery positive. Then there's also recovery negative. And for these people, they don't tell anyone. And why don't they tell anyone? Because of the shame and the stigma that's associated with this status of recovery. So again, live with that. What do you think about that? Another one of my favorites. Some of us say we're in recovery. Some of us say we're recovered. Some of us say we're recovering. What do we think about the word when somebody says, I've recovered? Anybody uncomfortable with that? Be honest. Thank you for your honesty. Anyone else? Thank you for your honesty. It's a tough one, right? I forgot my other big book that's very important. It's a blue one. On the cover, it says Alcoholics Anonymous. On the inside, it says how thousands of men and women recovered from alcoholism. That's the name of the book, right? Not how thousands of men and women are in recovery or recovering. Recovered, past tense. Sit with it. And make sure you look at the book. Don't just believe me. Look at the book. One of the things that's difficult of when people say, I'm recovering, people hear that as you're struggling, right? The lay people, the general society hear that as you're struggling. The insurance company hears that as, why would I continue to put money towards you if you're never going to get better? That's what they think. Regular people, there was a study done by Face and Voices years ago. This notion of in recovery, the general population thinks that it means we're still using, right? We got a long way to go. We need to know what it is that we're saying and what somebody else is saying when they're saying those words to us. So here's some of the resources that I was talking about that we all need to know. White Bison, Wellbriety, Steeped, Grounded for our Native American brothers and sisters. I work, and we've got a recovery center on the Navajo reservation. When I go out there to them, they say, AA was made by white people for white people, and we are not white people, right? So it's like, okay, but we still got to figure this thing out, right? So that's not the end of the statement. And that's one of the things that we're working really hard for, is to go beyond the end of that statement. There's LifeRing, Recovery Research Institute, Dr. Kelly. If you don't know it, find it. Most of what I've been talking about comes from the varieties of recovery experience. Smart Recovery, Recovery Dharma, AA, NA, there's over 200 anonymous programs, and they keep being added to each and every day. So this is my vision. And this is where folks like Dr. Omar can be part of the solution in a way that you don't have to have had the lived experience. So my brain works a little too big sometimes. So my real vision is a world in which all recovery stakeholders work together to become the leading voice in addiction prevention, survival, and recovery. I'll come down a little bit. So let's make Virginia the place in which all recovery stakeholders, physicians, family members, children, individuals, communities, we are all stakeholders. We need to work together to become the leading voice in addiction prevention, survival, and recovery. Thank you.